Yeah, a very warm welcome to everybody. I'm giving the welcome on behalf of Dr. Balaji. So let's move on to evolving treatment options in hormone receptor positive, HER2 negative, advanced breast cancer. It's a symposium organized by Freedom from Cancer, our foundation, in collaboration with Novartis and MedGenome and Reimaging Medicine. And also our digital partner is Kavina Creation. And I want active participation from everybody. So I invite our first speaker, Dr. S. Suresh, medical oncologist from Chennai, to take us through the journey of unprecedented overall survival with Crixana. Dr. Suresh, please, can you share your slides?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Thanks for the introduction, ma'am. And I would like to thank Dr. Anita and Novartis people for giving me this opportunity. Today, I'll be speaking on the Crixana's unprecedented overall survival journey with a superior overall survival. Okay, just a minute. So, we all know that Crixana has been approved for treatment of women with hormone receptor positive and HER2 negative locally advanced or metastatic breast cancer in combination with an aromatase inhibitor or fulvestrant as initial endocrine based therapy, or in patients who have received prior endocrine therapy. The objectives for this meet will be like reviewing the clinical evidence which is supporting the superior efficacy which has been achieved with Crixana, and reviewing the evidence of improved and maintained quality of life, and what makes Crixana different from other CDK4 inhibitors which we have right now in our treatment repertoire. So when considering options for metastatic breast cancer, what will be the primary treatment goal? And obviously we all, and majority of oncologists will say that the overall survival will be our number one treatment goal. But achieving this overall survival will be a very, very difficult challenge, because in the past 25 years, 5-year survival rates for hormone positive, HER2 negative metastatic breast cancer has hardly improved by less than 5%. And over the past few few studies with targeted therapies have reported statistically significant improvement in overall survival. And the challenges which we have in facing and or achieving an overall survival in MBC, progression-free survival has become a very clinical, meaningful endpoint for metastatic breast cancer trials. But we know that the improvement in PFS has not consistently translated into an overall survival benefit. So when we need to look at an overall survival benefit, and especially which is very, very difficult in metastatic breast cancers, we need to have PFS as an endpoint. And with CDK4/6 inhibitors also, it has not been consistently linked to an overall survival benefit, even though there is an improvement in PFS. But despite all these challenges, Crixana is the only one which has shown statistically to significantly improve overall survival across 2 phase 3 trials. And it is only CDK4/6 inhibitor to receive an ESMO magnitude of clinical benefit scale score of 5, which means how much they have achieved a clinical response. And it is the only CDK4/6 inhibitor which has been approved. And the ESMO MCBS score is 5 for MONALEESA 7 trial and 4 for MONALEESA 3 trial. And the difference in superior survival across all these 2 trials, which we be seeing here, this MONALEESA 3 is the initial trial where it was combined with fulvestrant, Crixana with fulvestrant, and placebo with fulvestrant. And MONALEESA 7 is a trial in premenopausal women, where in a combination with the non-steroidal aromatase inhibitors or tamoxifen with Crixana against placebo was trial. So we have a good number of patients, and MONALEESA 3 had first line or second line early relapses included in the trial, whereas in MONALEESA 7, which is the pre or perimenopausal women, all the patients who are taken to the trial were first line MBC patients. Coming to the disease characteristics, it was either a bone only metastasis or visceral metastasis. And according to the number of metastatic sites, it's more than 3 or less than 3. We see that they are evenly matched at a 2:1 in MONALEESA trial 3, whereas it was evenly matched in MONALEESA 7, 1:1. And the longest overall survival has been reported with Crixana. The 5-year survival is nearly more than 50%, and the latest overall survival says that 58.7 months has been achieved with Crixana with aromatase inhibitor, whereas it's with placebo it is around 47.7 months. That's a hazard ratio is 0.76, which means a 24% risk reduction is there, and when we add Crixana, and the overall survival is also improved when we combine with fulvestrant in postmenopausal patients, and we see there is a 28% risk reduction when we add Crixana with fulvestrant, and the median overall survival has not yet reached when we add Crixana with fulvestrant, whereas it is 40 months when we add placebo with fulvestrant. And the overall survival also we see that at 36 months it's 67% of people surviving at 3 years, and 57.8% of patients surviving more than 42 months. So this is a statistically significant improvement in overall survival, with an interim analysis showing a 28% risk reduction in death. And this is a Mona Lisa trial 3, and the overall survival has not yet reached in the intent to treat population, whereas for placebo with fulvestrant is 40 months. And in Mona Lisa 7, the overall survival is around 58.7 months, which is one of the best studies which we can have, and the overall survival is when compared to placebo, it's more than 10 months. And this survival benefit has been observed across all subgroups, including line of therapy and disease burden, either first line or early relapse, whether involvement of viscera or bone alone, or less than 3 numbers or more than 3. So irrespective of that, we see that adding Crixana with an aromatase inhibitors had a very good overall survival. Coming to the Asian populations, though we didn't have much of benefit, but the Caucasian patients had more response rate. So either doublet, ERPR positive, also benefited with addition of Crixana. And this is the other Mona Lisa 7 trial, which showed very good response across all the patients with tamoxifen or goserelin or NSAA with goserelin. They responded very well with Crixana. According to performance status, age less than 40 or more than 40, Asians or non-Asians. This is where with this group we see that the Asian benefited with addition of Crixana. And whether the patient had received a prior chemotherapy or adjuvant or neoadjuvant chemotherapy, everywhere we see that patients who had Crixana had a better response rate. And it also delayed time to disease progression across lines of therapy and with multiple combination partners. Crixana with fulvestrant had a median PFS of 20.6 months. And in case of first line, we had a 33.6 months of PFS. In Mona Lisa 7, the median PFS in patients intended to treat had 23.8 months. And with non-steroidal aromatase inhibitors, it was 27.5 months. So the hazard ratio has been very good, which means we see that nearly 45% risk reduction is there when we add Crixana with fulvestrant or with tamoxifen with NSAI. Coming to the quality of life, the difference in quality survival, and ABC4 guidelines highlights the importance of quality of life. And this is where we need to know, because overall survival alone is not enough. The quality of life is a subjective concept which will encompass the physical, emotional, social, and functional well-being. And these are the things which we should look into the patient's care, whether they have achieved a very good quality of life. The patient, this one of the quality of life indicator where the patients after Crixana, the time to subsequent chemotherapy has been delayed when we initiated with Crixana. When ribociclib with endocrine therapy has been initiated, there is a 50.9 months when we start subsequent chemotherapy. And when it's a placebo, it's within 36.8 months. And also the chemotherapy-free survival as median overall survival has been around 42.5 months compared to 26.4 months. And in Mona Lisa 3 trial, when we add Crixana with fulvestrant, the time to chemotherapy is not yet reached because the patients having overall survival is still good. And whereas in placebo with fulvestrant, the median time to chemotherapy is around 29.5 months. And these are the quality of life indicators like pain score, overall fatigue, diarrhea and nausea, vomiting, impairment of activity and impairment of work productivity. We see that Mona Lisa 3 and Mona Lisa 7, the overall quality has improved compared to placebo trial. So the functional status and quality of life has improved with Crixana, addition of Crixana. So the extended PFS of 25.3 months in a first line therapy in a metastatic breast cancer is very, very powerful. And we also see that there is an early separation of curves as early as 8 weeks when we add Crixana with letrozole. And this efficacy was seen across all pre-specified subgroups, regardless of patient and disease characteristics, age, performance status, bone-only disease, or visceral involvement, or prior neoadjuvant or adjuvant chemotherapy. Everywhere, when we add Crixana in later lines also, the patient benefited with quality of life. And also, the rapid clinical improvement was observed. As we saw earlier, within 8 weeks in all the three phase 3 trials, we see that the patient achieved a very good progression-free survival and quality of life within 8 weeks. The time to response, when we see with the investigator assessment, compared to placebo and letrozole, 50% of patients who received Crixana and letrozole had a response at 8 weeks, and this response was maintained throughout the treatment time. And at 8 weeks, we see that 3 out of 4 patients with Crixana and letrozole had a reduction in tumor size. And this 76% of patients who had received had a very good tumor reduction, which has been maintained throughout the treatment. So this is one of the example. And this is a scan wherein we see that the initial tumor size at baseline, and at 8 weeks, it shows a very good size reduction. Coming to the reduction in baseline, we see that more than 5% of the patients who had Crixana had a very good quality of life, and they are able to maintain without pain. And Crixana provides the highest level of CDK4 inhibition. So this is where we need to know what is the difference between Crixana and other CDK4/6 inhibitor. This is a basic thing wherein CDK4 and CDK6, which can act as key regulators of cell cycle progression, they bind to cyclin D, which then results in phosphorylation of retinoblastoma gene and activate the E2F gene, which drives the cell cycle progression. If CDK4/6 inhibitor is given, then this arrests the cell cycle, and then they will be having a very good disease control. Of CDK4 and CDK6, we see that CDK4 is the pivotal driver of breast cancer progression. Whereas other clinical trials have shown that in CDK6 is more pivotal in hematological malignancy rather than in breast cancers. And this is where we see that there are different CDK4 dependence and the other molecules which are acting on CDK4. And the molecules like breast cancer cells also express more CDK4 than CDK6. So we need to have a molecule which will have more CDK4 knocking down rather than CDK6. Coming to Crixana, which we see that the preferential inhibition of CDK4 versus CDK6 is 8 times, whereas for abemaciclib it's 6 times, and palbociclib is more or less equal. It inhibits both CDK4 and CDK6 at the same level. And that's why we see more complication wherein hematopoietic or lymphoid origin complications with palbociclib, whereas in Crixana we don't have much of hematopoietic complications. So this is one advantage which we need to use, and moreover, that is in the breast cancer, we know that CDK4 is a driver than CDK6. And it has also more drug availability to penetrate and act on the tumor cells. The free drug concentrations in the plasma is around 520 nanomoles, whereas in abemaciclib, palbociclib, it's only 2 digits. So there is a high concentration of free drug available, which can penetrate and act on the tumor cells and inhibit the CDK4. Comparing to the three possible CDK4/6 inhibitors, we see that the preferential inhibition with CDK4 is more with Crixana, 8 times, and the free drug concentration is 22 times compared to abemaciclib and palbociclib. So these two things are the main driving points wherein we need to know and make use of the inhibitors in hormone-positive, HER2-negative breast cancer patients. So this is the only CDK4/6 inhibitor which has been proven to help women live longer. The MONALEESA 3 trial has shown a risk reduction of 28% and MONALEESA 7 has a risk reduction of 29%. And this treatment has consistently delayed time to chemotherapy with an improved or maintained quality of life. And the more effective inhibitions is a main driver for breast cancer inhibition. So how to optimize your patient's Crixana treatment experience? We need to have a baseline, cycle 1, cycle 2, and cycle 3. And we all know, and we have been fairly very experienced in the past 1.5 years, wherein we have started using Crixana. So when we come for cycle 1, baseline, you do a CBC, LFT electrolytes and ECG for any QT prolongation. And first cycle, mid-cycle, you look for any CBC, LFTs and ECG changes. And at starting of second cycle also you do this. But thereafter, we don't need to do an ECG for any QT prolongation. It will be enough that we do an CBC and LFTs from cycle 3 onwards. And beyond cycle 6, the recommendation is there is no need for any scheduled monitoring. And it's also comes with a convenient dosing and administration. The recommended dosage is 600 milligram daily, which can be given as 3 into 200 milligram tablets, which has to be taken at the same time. Can be taken with or without food. And if at all patient has some complications, adverse events, then it is easy to give a reduction, because the next dose reduction can be 400 milligrams. That's 2 tablets. And further reduction, we can go in for 1 tablet, 200 milligram daily. The safety profile, we see the Crixana's safety profile is predictable, as we have been practicing for the past 1.5 years, manageable through dose modifications, and reversible. If we stop them or we do a dose modification, most of the adverse events become reversible. The majority of adverse events in MONALEESA 7 trial, as we also see in our clinical practice, is neutropenia, leukopenia, and very rarely hot flash, nausea, vomiting, anemia, diarrhea, or arthralgias. And MONALEESA 3 also had the same predictable, manageable, reversible complications like neutropenia, anemia, leukopenia, and hot flashes, pain in extremities are also present. So this is other MONALEESA 2 trial, wherein patient was given Crixana with letrozole, which are also easily manageable, neutropenia with leukopenia. I think with this experience, we know that it has got a good overall survival compared to other 2 molecules. It can be having a high concentration and high affinity for CDK4, and coming to the improvement in quality of life, within 8 weeks, they are having a very good response rate. And coming to adverse event, they are all predictable, easily manageable, and reversible with our prudent treatment. Thank you. Thank you. Hello. Hello?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Yeah, I just finished. Thank you.
Anita ma'am, you will have to unmute your mic. I think ma'am is busy. Without wasting any further time, thank you so much, sir, for such a good talk. I would like to invite the second speaker for today, Dr. Arun Kumar. So, could you please share your screen?
Sure, I'm just doing that.
Thank you, sir.
Is my screen visible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. A very good evening to all the faculties and the participants. So I'm Arun Kumar, I'm a geneticist, and I'll be talking about molecular testing of PIK3CA variants. What are the logic behind doing it, and what are the technologies available for it? So this is the agenda for my today's presentation. I'll give a brief background about PIK3CA and why PIK3CA testing has to be done, and how what assay is actually being done for PIK3CA testing, and a glimpse of how a PIK3CA report looks like. So, PIK3 is essentially a phosphatidylinositol 3 kinase. It is a target of rapamycin, mTOR signaling pathway takes place, and it is a very important intracellular pathway which regulates multiple functions in the cell, such as cell growth, motility, survival, metabolism, and also takes parts in angiogenesis. So, activation of this PIK3 mTOR pathway contributes to the development of tumor and resistance to multiple anti-cancer therapies. So PA3K is essentially a group of plasma membrane associated lipid kinases. It's an enzyme and it consists of three subunits, two regulatory subunits and one catalytic subunit. So based on the subunits, it's further classified as 1A, 1B, 2 and 3. And it is this catalytic subunit where you have the PIK3CA gene encoding this catalytic subunit. So what actually this PIK3 does is that, take for example in this cartoon, this is a plasma membrane. You have a receptor tyrosine kinase and a growth hormone receptor is there. When the growth factor binds on to the ligand, it immediately activates the PI3K gamma, or the receptor tyrosine kinase will also activate the PI3K, which in turn activates the PKD1 AKT and the mTOR pathway, or the same mTOR pathway as we know in other cases of EGFR, etc. It can also activate via the RAS-RAF ERK pathway, which also eventually activates the mTOR. So PIK3 plays a very important role here in activating the mTOR pathway, which essentially leads to the growth and proliferation of the cell. So this is the structure of the PI3K, where you have consider this to be the protein. There are three important exons in the PIK3, which can where you see a high level of mutations taking place. These mutations are gain of function mutations. So gain of function mutations are those mutations which constitutively activate the protein even without the ligand binding onto the receptor. So essentially, when this gain of function mutation takes place, even without a ligand binding or the growth factor binding onto the RTKs, the PIK3 is activated, and hence the mTOR signaling pathway gets constitutively activated, leading to the growth and excessive growth of the cell. So this gain of function mutations are mostly occurring in the exon 7 at the amino acid position 420, exon 9 at the amino acid positions 545 and 546, and in the exon 20 at the amino acid positions 1048. So it is these three exons that are quite important to be analyzed for PIK3CA mutations. So what is the rationale of doing this PIK3CA testing in a breast cancer? So it has been identified that PIK3CA gene is mutated in almost up to 35% of invasive breast cancer cases, depending on the subtypes. And in early breast cancer setting, PIK3CA mutations are associated with better invasive disease-free survival and overall survival, but has a lesser prognostic effect. And in HER2 positive tumors, PIK3CA mutations correlate with a lower pathological complete response rate. Apart from this, PIK3CA mutated hormone receptor positive HER2 negative metastatic breast cancer patients present a poor outcome and resistance to chemotherapy. The resistance is primarily because of the constitutive activation of the mTOR pathway. And finally, mutated PIK3CA is targetable. As we know, there is this alpelisib and fulvestrant combination is indicated to treat postmenopausal women who are hormone positive, HER2 negative, and PIK3CA mutated advanced cases of breast cancer. Interestingly, there is also a study which clearly shows that more women with or the cells with multiple PIK3CA mutations, especially double mutations, they have a higher response to the PIK3CA inhibitor. So there was a study in 2019 where they showed that in single mutated PIK3CA versus placebo, the overall survival rate was 18.1% versus 10%. On the other hand, in a double mutated PIK3CA, the overall response rate was 30.2% versus the placebo of 8.7%. Although it's a very small study, it clearly states that the double mutant PIK3CA is responding much well to this inhibitor. So what does the guideline says? It clearly states that hormone receptor positive, HER2 negative PIK3CA cases, mutated cases, can be treated with FDA-approved drug alpelisib, and it is a preferred second-line therapy. Now, NCCN also clearly states that the testing can be done by PCR, either in a blood or tissue block. Tissue block is secondary if the primary blood sample is negative. Blood in this case essentially is meant for cell-free DNA testing or the liquid biopsy setting. So there is this PCR approved, FDA approved PCR kit called as TerraScreen kit, which is the FDA approved companion diagnostic kit for testing PIK3CA mutations. So what exactly this kit does is that it's a real-time PCR kit which is based on ARMS PCR technology, where you have specific primers which are complementary to the specific mutations here, and it has a fluorescent probe which is having the which actually gives a fluorescent signal, and this kit detects all these 11 mutations in the various exons of the PIK3CA which was mentioned earlier. So these mutations are independently detected, and these mutations can be detected both in a liquid biopsy as well as in a tissue sample testing condition. And the limit of detection as per this kit is that in a tissue sample, you need to have the mutations, depending on the type of mutation, it ranges from 2.41% to 14.04%. In other words, some of the mutations will be detected even if they are at in a 2.4% allele fraction up to 14.4. On the other hand, in a liquid biopsy setting, it ranges from 1.82% to 5.31%. So what is the sample type for this? For the tissue, it has to be a tissue block with a minimum of 20% tumor content. And for the liquid biopsy, it is 10 ml of peripheral blood in specialized tubes called as Streck tubes, which actually preserve the cells from degrading and preserves the DNA that is there in the plasma to be extracted in a comfortable state. So the regular EDTA tubes cannot be used for cell-free DNA extraction. So this is how a liquid biopsy report looks like. It starts with, of course, the patient identifiers and the clinical diagnosis, etc. Then the list of the 11 mutations are given, and based on whichever is positive, it is simply given as a binary yes or no, whether it is positive or negative. And the clinical significance is further given in the report, and the detailed methodology of how the technology of the real-time PCR works and what are the targets are given. And along with it, the clinical significance on the specific clinical trials that have gone behind the particular drug will also be given, followed by the disclaimers and the signatories. This is an example of a PIK3CA testing by next generation sequencing. The point to be noted here is that the FDA approved kit will detect the specific 11 mutations only. Now, if at all you would like to know if there are other mutations present in the same PIK3CA gene, the sequencing of the entire PIK3CA gene is recommended, which can be done by a next generation sequencing technology. And in fact, this is one of the cases where we have seen the PIK3CA containing two mutations, one in the exon 10, the other in the exon 21. So both of which have are targetable by alpelisib. And you can see that it was sequenced at a depth of 771x and 669x respectively. And the mutant allele fraction, that is the number of cells in the tissue which actually had the mutation, was 6.4% and 7.9% respectively. So this is a case of a double mutant PIK3CA, which might give a better response to the PIK3CA inhibitor. So there were no other variants of uncertain significance in this, and we go on to describe what type of variant it is and how what is the use of this particular PIK3CA in the cell, and how the mutation can be targeted by various PIK3CA inhibitors. So it is essentially a glutamic acid 545 position becomes a lysine, histidine at 1047 becomes a leucine, and it's a gain of function pathogenic variant which was detected by NGS. So with this brief, I would like to conclude my talk, wherein to say that PIK3CA activates the cellular pathway. It is targetable by alpelisib, and it can be detected by the FDA-approved TheraScreen PCR kit, or it can also be detected by sequencing of the entire gene, where you can also pick up double mutants present in the gene. So with this, I conclude my talk. I thank you all for this opportunity, and I'll be very happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you so much, sir. So we'll take questions in the panel discussion. Moving on to the next session, I would like Dr. Prasad. So if you can start sharing your screen.
Just the way forward is create awareness.
Dr. Prasad, sir, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Can I go ahead?
Yes, sir, sure.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk in this August audience. So I'll be having a quick session on the use of the second line molecule in hormone positive luminal type of breast cancer. I hope this would be a quick slide. I'll be able to do justice to the presentation. So almost like most of the CDK4 inhibitors have completely revolutionized the treatment plan for the metastatic luminal breast cancers, and now we do have nearly about a very good survival in patients who have MBC and a luminal subtype. But what to do after they develop progression? So that is the major situation. So what is the second line molecule after the patient progresses on a first line CDK4 inhibitor as the hormonal agent? So the researchers took their time, and they were able to come out with discovering the molecule PIK3CA, in which nearly about 40% of the metastatic breast cancer had expressed this mutation. And it was found that those patients who had this specific PIK expression, they were having a very bad prognosis. So basically, the analysis had happened in meta-analysis of nearly about 2,000 patients who had had prior expression to the chemotherapy and the endocrine therapy. And it was found that the expression of this specific molecule was associated with quite a disease resistance and with disease progression and a poor response to the ongoing hormonal therapy or the chemotherapy. So it was subsequently found that this mutation was specifically associated with the separate pathway, which is directly linked to the tumorigenesis, higher cellular proliferation, the endocrine resistance. These patients would not respond to the second line or the third line endocrine therapy, and it's quite difficult to treat these patients with the subsequent endocrine treatment. So most of the patients who had failed on the first line CDK4 inhibitor, they would progress on to chemotherapy. So, but since this molecule had been, since this genetic mutation had been discovered, subsequently the therapeutic intervention for this molecule had been identified, and alpelisib is the specific molecule which had been discovered to work with this particular mutation. So we could see that there are multiple isoforms of this particular mutation, and alpelisib specifically acts on the alpha isomer along with fulvestrant, and both are able to have a synergistic outcome in the preclinical studies. So the molecule went through the phase 1 and a phase 2 study, and subsequently it was evaluated in a randomized multi-control randomized control trial, which is called as the SOLAR-1 trial. So this particular trial had the patients identified with the disease progression after the first line therapy, and all these patients were identified those who had PIK3CA mutation, and they were randomized in a 1:1 fashion into those who would receive alpelisib along with fulvestrant compared to fulvestrant as along with the placebo. So we could look at the usual endpoints of randomized clinical trial, where we looked at the progression-free survival, overall response rate, clinical benefit rate, safety, and the quality of life issues. When we could get these results analyzed, the combination of alpelisib along with fulvestrant in a second line setting in those specific patients who had PI3KCA mutation, it was found that the benefit with the combination had nearly been 11 months compared to that of 5.7 months with alpelisib, with the fulvestrant agent. So it's nearly about double the progression-free survival advantage. And when the hazard ratio was evaluated, alpelisib had scored in almost all the segment of patients, those who had visceral disease, bone metastasis, who had had a prior exposure or not, prior chemotherapy or not, or first, second line chemotherapy, as well as those patients who had a primary or a secondary resistance to endocrine therapy. So if we look at the overall response rate, again, the combination had really scored double over that of the fulvestrant as a single agent. So overall response rate who had measurable disease has nearly about 35% compared to that of 16%. And the overall response rate when it was evaluated in both measurable and non-measurable lesions, it was nearly double, and the p-values were pretty significant. So we could see that the forest plot curve had shown that the patient who had this combination had quite a significant, nearly about 75% of reduction in the tumor size, and it could have a deeper response. We could see the response. They could also some patients could also achieve, could reach a complete response rate. So coming to the dosage and administration of alpelisib, it's quite a easier medication. No IV, it's all medications given via oral, and the medications are can be titrated based on the side effects. So we do have this drug which is recommended at 300 milligram once daily, and in case of any serious adverse events, we could go in for a 50 milligram dose reduction to about 250 milligram, and subsequently to 200 milligram. So what really are the grade 3 disadvantages with this medication? We could see fatigue and hyperglycemia, which are easily manageable, and it can be managed as an outpatient mode. So what exactly is the reason for hyperglycemia? We could see that the PI3K mutation is also associated with the receptors which is involved in the glucose metabolism. Generally, when there is a receptor tyrosine kinase, there is the same receptor tyrosine kinase is also involved in the glucose symport. So when PI3K is inhibited, the insulin uptake is inhibited. Because of there is an interruption in the insulin uptake, the sugars are not absorbed into the cell, and there is quite an increase in hyperglycemic events. We could easily identify those patients who have hyperglycemia by doing a simple capillary blood glucose by means of glucometer, and based on the grade, you will be able to have a dose adjustment. So grade 1 and grade 2 doesn't really need to have a dose adjustment, but those patients who would develop grade 3, then probably we need to have this alpelisib evaluated and the doses adjusted accordingly. So probably we need to have a very good communication with the endocrinologist, because insulin is not going to work in these patients because there is a problem with the receptor intake along with insulin. So these patients needs to be managed by means of giving metformin and by adding pioglitazone. Likewise, those patients who are already on this drug and those who have hyperglycemia needs to be properly counseled for a lifestyle change to make sure that the sugars doesn't get elevated and their sugars are continuously monitored and they are stable during the course of the treatment. So we could see that the longer the duration of the patients who doesn't develop hyperglycemia or at least titrated to have a normoglycemic status, they'll be able to continue to have a good benefit with alpelisib in the second line setting. So these patients needs to be properly educated first. They have to be properly evaluated with the fasting plasma glucose, their baseline HbA1c. And during the initial course of the treatment, along with the lifestyle modification and proper education, the sugars needs to be monitored at least every 2 to 3 days in the first 2 to 3 weeks. And subsequently, once we know the individual's response to the drug as well as to their adherence to the treatment, we'll be able to monitor the subsequent sugar levels in a longer period. So as we had been clearly educated, we know that these patients can be evaluated by means of either a tissue or a liquid specimen for the specific mutation which happens in the codons E542, 545 in exon 9 and H1047 in exon 20. So these patients can be evaluated either by means of the kit or by the next generation sequencing, which is supported by the company as well as in other private labs. So we could see that patients in which in whom tumor might not be available, we could still go with a liquid biopsy for the expression of PI3K mutation. And if it is still negative, then probably we can go in for a repeat tumor biopsy and get the test evaluated. So in summary, we could see that this mutation is nearly about 40% of the patients. It's associated with poorer prognosis. But thanks to the science and research, we were able to find out a new molecule which specifically targets this particular mutation. In the patients, we could really see an improvement in the progression-free survival, response rates, as well as the overall response rate. So we could have a good extension, good benefit in the patients at the second line setting with this combination of alpelisib along with fulvestrant, who progresses on the first line CDK4/6 inhibitors with any of the aromatase inhibitors. So thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity given to me.
Thank you so much, sir. I would now like to invite Dr. Bhavesh Pahade and Dr. Vikas Talreja to give their expert comments.
Hello, audible?
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Vikas, go ahead. Then I'll continue.
Very good evening and very thank you for the kind opportunity to everybody. I believe after such a spectacular presentation, I am left with no words to describe, but as an expert, I think the breast cancer has evolved unprecedentedly in a very manner that we have changed the way we have started treating the patients. We have changed the way the more of chemo-free intervals. So the introduction of CDK4/6 inhibitors, especially the Crixana, especially in the premenopausal patients, and also subsequently sequencing them with the finding out those 40-50% cases of PIK3CA mutations and giving them PIK3CA inhibitors have changed the way the entire breast cancer is being managed. And I believe the future is the way ahead to get more of precision oncology, more of targeted therapy. And I believe with the introduction of newer CDK4/6 inhibitors, newer targets, I believe we will be looking for more chemo-free options much ahead for us. Not wasting further more time, I request Dr. Bhavesh also to give the expert comments and then to the moderator for the next.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible, sir.
So Yes, I just second each and every word that told by Vikas. Definitely, the lectures were very, very clear, complete, and crisp. So there is hardly any doubt in my mind after going through all the three presentations. And the most important part is that now, like anti-HER2 therapy, we have targets in ER or hormone positive metastatic breast cancer patients also. So starting with CDK4/6, once we start with CDK4/6, then if the patient progresses on there was no option initially but to go for chemotherapy. But now with the advent of PI3K research, and we have not only the mutation but also we have treatment for that, and the treatment is also looking very, very promising with doubling of PFS. So our armamentarium for hormone or continuation of hormone manipulation increases, and I think for at least for a couple of years, if not less than 2 to 4 years, we can keep the patients of metastatic breast cancer which are hormone positive on hormone manipulation, and obviously once they progress after 2 to 3 lines of therapy of hormone manipulation, only then they will go for chemotherapy options. So definitely, this is increasing our armamentarium and better quality of life for patients. I think I end here and hand over the proceedings to the presenter. Imani, you can proceed.
Yeah. Yes, a very good evening to everybody. Can I share my slides, and can you invite our panelists for today?
Yes, ma'am, you can share your slides.
Yeah, okay. So I invite Dr. KB Akila. Also, I invite Dr. Suman Kalyan, Dr. Jagan Nivas, Dr. J. Balaji, Dr. A. Ravichandran, Dr. Mohammad Ibrahim, Dr. Rajesh Kar, Dr. Irappa Madhavi, Dr. Vandana Mahajan, and Dr. Jovita. I wish all my panelists are there. Can I share the slides? It's not coming.
Yes, ma'am, you'll be able to share your slides.
Okay, 1 minute.
Ma'am, also please note Dr. Jigna Nawaz is unable to join us today.
Jagan Nivas, okay.
Hi, ma'am. Good evening.
Yeah, hello, Sumanta. Nice seeing you. Okay. Yeah, is my slides visible?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay. Very warm welcome to everybody. Thank you so much. Okay. As we move on to the first presentation, yes, in May 2018, decreased appetite, breathing difficulty, back pain. She reported had a mass in the left breast, which was noted for 3 years. She didn't go to the hospital. Huge mass, multiple bone mets. Yes, low calcium, and had a biopsy, which was that we'll discuss about the biopsy. Now we have Dr. Vandana Mahajan with us. Now, Dr. Vandana, okay, how do we proceed? Which is the best investigation for us at this point of time? And what do you comment about the mass? It looks more lobulated, or how do you differentiate? Yes, Dr. Vandana, please.
This mass is looking little bit more well circumscribed, but it is occupying all the quadrants, and generally such huge masses, I would suggest you that you go ahead with the patient would have presented to you and with such a huge mass, and of course you would have wanted to do a PET scan to know the distance spread. And I guess these pictures are a part of either the CT chest or the PET scan of the patient, in which I can see a large mass in the breast plus some bony lesion in the sternal area, or it might be a nodal mass which is in the internal mammary region and going into the sternum, plus a vertebral metastasis which is also seen.
Yes, Dr. Mohammad Ibrahim, being a surgeon, okay, if you forget to leave about the mediastinal mass and the bone, what do you think about the operability, provided PECT is not showing any meds, by seeing this picture?
Yeah,
even though the thing is very huge, it depends upon how much skin we will be available for the closure of the wound. So with this CT image, we may not be able to tell whether it will be operable or not. So sometimes if it is a pendulous lesion, we can close the defect. So if the pec major is not much involved, we can go ahead and operate the patient, leaving aside the metastasis.
Okay, fine. And do you do regularly a plastic reconstruction of the chest wall?
Yeah, when we are considering plastic reconstruction of the chest wall, we see that it is a non-metastatic lesion. So if it is a metastatic lesion, we don't contemplate on major surgical resections.
Okay, and looking at the vertebra, doctor, okay, what is your thought process of vertebral stabilization? Or what is the criteria when you need a surgeon to stabilize the vertebrae, and when do you need a radiation oncologist to radiate the vertebrae?
Yeah, if the vertebra is an isolated lesion and it is involving two of the three major elements, then we'll go for a stabilization. So most of the time with reference to carcinoma breast, we don't get isolated vertebral mets usually. So such kind of vertebral stabilization, we don't contemplate in metastatic carcinoma breast.
Okay, fine. Okay, now doctor, again back to Dr. Vandana. Okay, what would be preferred investigation you would like to have? Okay, what do you think in which investigation gives you a more better, and even Dr. Ibrahim also, as a surgeon, what would be your choice of investigation?
See, such a big lesion, I would have definitely gone in for a PET CT because it will give you the total idea of the exact idea of at least how much is the distance spread. You know, the brain would have been covered, the whole spine would have been covered, and then if there is any critical spinal lesion, you're expecting multiple metastases, the liver, the lung, everything, you know, it's a one-stop shop. So PET CT is a better investigation in such huge masses.
Okay, okay, okay. And Dr. Ibrahim?
Yeah, I again go ahead with single shot investigation, whole body PET CT, and imaging wise and histologically, I'll go with a true cut biopsy from the primary.
Okay, fine. And again, back to the same question almost, Dr. Ibrahim. Okay, just I need few points of the role of mastectomy, whether you call it toilet mastectomy, simple mastectomy in a metastatic disease, what the guideline says and what your thought process in a metastatic disease. Dr. Ibrahim.
Yeah. So in such cases of large lesions, even though if it is a slow growing lesion, we usually get an ulcer, whether it may be a static ulcer or an infiltrating malignant ulcer. So ulcer is more cumbersome to manage for the patients and the attenders. So if the lesion is operable, we definitely go ahead with the mastectomy. The terminology of toilet mastectomy is no longer used. It is a simple mastectomy or a total mastectomy. And as much as node is removed, which is close to the primary lesion, and we don't contemplate for any complete axillary dissections. So the main target of such a resection, simple mastectomy or a toilet mastectomy or whatever the terminology we use, is freedom for the patient from the ulcer, from the malignant ulcer. That is the concept.
Yes, I also agree with you. For many of my patients, though it's a metastatic disease and you know it's a debatable area where a role of mastectomy, I think we can discuss in both ways. Yeah, once the primary is out, because we are now going to discuss about drugs, which keeps us going for more than 2 to 3 years. So why not take the tumor out? Absolutely, you are correct. The fear of ulcer, and it's fungating, and sometimes we get maggots in the wound and it is very, very bad. So whereas you can prolong their life with other drugs, so better thing. Going down. So this patient has multiple metastatic disease. Again, back to Dr. Vandana. Does bone scan give you extra information over a PET CT as far as bones are concerned?
No, in fact, you know, the PET CT scores superior over the bone scan because you can exactly delineate whether there is cord compression, whether there is only thecal sac indentation, plus of course the other additional benefits of checking the rest of the metastasis. And in case if you have any skeleton in the calvarial metastasis, your whether it is critical, whether it is going inside the skull, all those are far superior in PET scan rather than in the bone scan.
Yeah, this picture looks like that she's having some calvarial
Calvarial metastasis. You can see some rib metastasis.
Yeah.
And impending fractures are better seen by the PET CT rather than only a simple bone scan.
Yeah, yeah. These are, I think, important points. But yes, we do bone scan in a limited resources area. Yeah, with the CT scan we do. But then if you see that some of the PET CT scans are so economical, I mean, by doing 3 separately, it comes almost to the same thing. So that's how we go about. Okay, let's move on to.
Sorry to interrupt, ma'am. Dr. Jagan Nawaz is logged in, ma'am.
Yeah, you know about. I know, we'll call him. I have this thing. Yeah. So can I speak to Dr. Akila? Dr. Akila is there?
Yes, ma'am, I'm here.
This is the pictures you saw about the bone, the breast. We heard our surgeon speaking, how nicely he told. You heard Vandana, clear cut. Okay, how do you go about for this particular patient?
Ma'am, after doing true cut biopsy, I would like to go ahead with the immunohistochemistry. And if the the treatment will be based on immunohistochemistry. And according to that, I would like to choose the treatment.
Yeah, is ER positive, PR positive, HER2 negative?
Okay, since being she's a postmenopausal woman, my first treatment will be an aromatase inhibitor. And of course, now I would like to add on CDK4 inhibitors.
Yes, Dr. Soman?
Ma'am, yes, ma'am. I agree with Dr. Akila. I would be tempted to use CDK4 inhibitor in the first line, along with an aromatase inhibitor.
Dr. Balaji is there? Dr. Balaji? He's there? Because I want to know what happens in the medical college. He's not there?
My medical college, we will just give chemotherapy, ma'am, because we do not have ribociclib.
Okay. What about aromatase inhibitors alone?
Yeah, but then with such a massive, such a big mass, I think I would be reluctant to use letrozole alone.
Correct. Okay. Yes, chemotherapy may be a good option. Okay. Okay, doctor. Now, if you see the hormone receptor positive, HER2 negative metastatic breast cancer, the assessment of the disease burden, symptoms, status, disease-free and treatment-free interval. Now, I would like Dr. Jagan Nawaz, just the chart is out here. What is your thought process? How do you go about visceral crisis? How do you define visceral crisis? Dr. Jagan?
Yeah, yes, ma'am. Visceral crisis, even though if there are visceral crisis as such, only if the patient is symptomatic due to visceral involvement, ma'am, either due to lung involvement or liver involvement. Just organ involvement alone, we don't take it as visceral crisis. So if they are really breathless, or if there is a jaundice, or if there is an impending liver organ dysfunction, then we consider it as a visceral crisis. In that case, we prefer probably chemotherapy for a quick relief. That is how we define. Okay. If the organ is involved, still not involved, we go with the hormone plus CDK4 inhibitor.
Okay, so what would be your choice of hormones?
Postmenopausal, obviously aromatase inhibitor. Premenopausal will be the tamoxifen.
Okay. Yes. Then Dr. Ravichandran, how will you approach the treatment for this particular patient? And by definition, do you think she is in visceral crisis? Visceral crisis is a subjective comparative term. So, the case that we discussed.
Next, we go by signs and symptoms and laboratory parameters and rapidity which disease progresses. So, by taking all these criteria, I would like to use chemotherapy in this case.
Why do you want to use? You are right. You can be right. Dr. Akila says that in medical college, you will use chemo for this patient. Just tell me, Dr. Ravichandran.
But as a patient is very symptomatic, so I would like to use chemo so that we can get a rapid response.
Okay, that's another way. Again, that's what I told you. Visceral crisis is also a subjective and objective. It might differ from people's assessment and because great importance is there. But definitely, these are some of the options. And quickly, again, back to Dr. Suman. So, chemo versus endocrine therapy, the meta-analysis of the randomized trial. So how do you look into this and when do we use the chemotherapy and when is the endocrine therapy? Dr. Suman.
Yes, ma'am.
That's the chart is there. Chemo versus endocrine. What is your take? How will you go ahead?
Ma'am, I would prefer endocrine therapy only.
Okay, why?
Excuse me, ma'am.
Why do you prefer?
Because this patient doesn't have a visceral crisis, ma'am. And even in the presence of visceral crisis now, since we have these CDK4 inhibitors, for example, we have a lung mets or a pleural efficient. Even for these patients, the response time is only 6 weeks. So, so even in that setting, I would still prefer CDK4 inhibitor in the first line. I have tried and it worked out well.
From Madhavi, okay, the different palbociclib, Mona Lisa, Lola study, okay, and we know that we have progressed over a period of time, as you see the timeline from 2014, 2019, 2020, and we have all the data in front of you. Dr. Irappa Madhavi, your thought process on using of the CDK4 inhibitors in this scenario?
Good evening, ma'am.
Yeah, good evening. Your thought process.
Yeah, ma'am. This patient is actually high ER close to 80% and PR is 20%. And I would prefer hormonal therapy, aromatase inhibitors plus CDK4/6 inhibitors. First line would be my first choice would be letrozole plus this one, Crixana, because it has shown very good survival benefit, PFS benefit, doubling the PFS benefit, and it has more drug concentration at tumor cells. And so I would.
Rajappa, for the excellent case-based discussion, with the usual complications and effects.
Yes, you have to.
I would like to say is that
you have to unmute. I request the digital partners to unmute those who are not talking. There's another parallel session going on. I think we can hear that. Okay, Doctor. Yes, Dr. Madhavi, what you were saying is good. Yeah, please continue.
And it has shown very good quality of life improvement in ESMO USB score. So, and less side effects. Chemotherapy, patient will be having more side effects. First preference would be this one. Aromatic inhibitors plus CDK4/6 inhibitors.
Yeah. Yes, Dr. Jovita, what is your choice of CDK4 inhibitors in this particular case?
Ma'am, my choice would be definitely ribociclib plus aromatase inhibitors like letrozole. The reason is because definitely Mona Lisa 2, it has shown very good benefit in the postmenopausal setting. And it's also easier and the complications are quite tackleable. That's what I feel.
Yes, yeah, thank you. See, if you see the overall survival and the progression-free survival from the targeted therapy trials and metastatic breast cancer and the updated NCCN guidelines 2020 says that CDK4/6 inhibitors, they are the preferred first line, second line, and in subsequent therapy for pre and postmenopausal patients with HER2 negative, hormone receptor positive cancer, and can be used in a low risk, intermediate risk, and there is some data also of using when there is a visceral crisis, like how our panelists said, it's a subjective matter. And taking CDK4/6 inhibitors with endocrine therapy may help to control the cancer longer. We have seen the progression-free and the overall survival data. But again, nothing to worry. Yes, if it fails, we do have the PI3K inhibitors, alpelisib, second-line subsequent therapy in this subset of patients who develop a mutation of the PI3 kinase. And given in combination with an anti-estrogen, particularly fulvestrant, helps to delay the tumor growth and longer progression-free survival. And the NCCN guidelines also says chemo to be restricted in visceral crisis. That remains unchanged. How you define visceral crisis, you have to take a decision at your bedside. Because suppose sometime the patient may not fall in the theoretical, like how Dr. Ravichandran said, may not fall in the definition of note or the textbook written visceral crisis, but the patient might be quite sick, might need. And yes, Dr. J. Balaji is joined. Dr. Balaji?
No, ma'am.
Huh? No, he has not joined. Okay, before we move on to this, a quick question to Dr. Rajesh Kar. You saw so much of bone metastasis. So what is your approach to the bone mets? Dr. Rajesh? Dr. Rajesh Kar?
Sir has not logged in, ma'am.
He has not. Dr. Balaji and Dr. Rajesh, both of them are not there.
Yes.
Next is, let's move on to know about this. And coming back to Dr. Ravichandran, okay, your thought process on this.
Yes, madam. First, we have to see whether the patient is symptomatic or not. And then we have to look for the impending fracture is there or not. If there is impending fracture, we have to stabilize and then followed by radiation, then go in with the hormonal therapy plus CDK4 inhibitor. Before that, we have to then we have to add bone modifying agents after dental evaluation.
Okay, thank you, doctor. Dr. Akila, we have the Mona Lisa 7, 2, Monarch 3, Paloma 2, Paloma 1. Okay. Just,
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, please tell us your conclusion from this slide.
Ma'am?
Yeah, your concluding remarks from this slide when you see the endocrine receptor sensitive metastatic breast cancer.
Hello. Ma'am, definitely, I mean, endocrine plus CDK4 has
Yeah, definitely you see a more than 2 year. If you see the Mona Lisa 2 and 7, Monarch 3, they all range, and even the Paloma 2. Yes, Dr. Akila, please. Dr. Akila. Okay, so this patient had, so can we continue zoledronic acid, ribociclib, and letrozole? And you see the stunning responses from May 2018, August, as well as 2019, July. We continued with the primary treatment. Now again, question to Dr. Ibrahim. If you see it's July 2019, you see the size of the breast mass. Do you feel at this point of time you will be able to take it out?
Definitely, madam. There is almost 70 to 90% reduction when we compare to the prior images. So if it is operable, I will go ahead and do the surgery.
I think this is a better position for you to do the surgery and do what you call a total mastectomy.
Definitely.
Total mastectomy. Yes, this question we have discussed in a visceral crisis. Even the guideline says chemotherapy, but there is also data that CDK4/6 inhibitors and endocrine therapy can be used. And this is with a huge disease burden. And you see the graphs separating with the median progression free when you use the two drugs is almost 19% and statistically significant. Now, again, quick question to Dr. Jagan. The treatment recommendation in advanced cancer, how confident are you that you know the data sufficiently to explain the impact on quality of life? Dr. Jagan? Dr. Jagan is there, or even Dr. Veerappa Madhavi? How do you think it affects your quality of life? Dr. Veerappa Madhavi or Dr. Ravichandran and Dr. Jagan?
Yes, ma'am, Dr. Ravichandran.
Yes, please tell me.
with the CDK4 inhibitors, there is a very good preservation of quality of life. Actually, it is even improved with ribociclib. So there is a very good data to say that there is a very good quality of life.
Good quality of. You think it's a good manageable drug? Yes.
Yes,
So,
yes.
which tells us of the maintenance of the quality of life in CDK4/6 inhibitors. If you see the Mona Lisa, the Monarch, and the Paloma trial, and the quality of life outcomes at 27 or more than 2 years, all the even the Mona Lisa and all the Mona Lisa is above 2 years. So there is significant amount of preservation of the quality of life. Okay, Dr. Jovita. Okay, so in the pool analysis, the time to deterioration was greater than 10% in the quality of life. And a quick question to you. Do you decide, because if all the 3 drugs are available to you, what would be your choice of drugs? Dr. Jovita.
Yes, ma'am. Choice of drug as in within the CDK4/6 inhibitors, ma'am. Is that what you're asking? Yeah, ma'am. Palbo, I think my choice will still be ribociclib, ma'am. Because one, with respect to the cost, with respect to the complications and the response rate and the quality of life that it gives, I think it's quite impressive seeing the data.
You have an overall survival data, you have an efficacy data, you have a progression-free survival data, you have a toxicity profile, and you have a good quality of this thing. And also, we do have the assistance program, which I think is much better than any of the other drugs. Any of the other drugs that will help us, because patient assistance program becomes a part of the discussion. Okay, so how much we can help the patient so that we can pass on the benefit to others. So 2 drugs, ribociclib, abemaciclib, have shown significant OS benefit. And if you see the Mona Lisa 7, Mona Lisa 3, Monarch 2, okay, all favors the CD, and even the Paloma 3, palbociclib. So there's a consistent improvement in the overall survival. If you result, patient with endocrine resistance, yes, Mona Lisa 3 and 7, even Monarch has shown in a resistant case also favors the use of the 2 drugs. Okay, this is again favoring showed overall benefit patients both in visceral and bone only metastasis. Again, consistent improvement in the survival is seen. Shows results in the CNS Mets. Again, quick question to any of the panelists. Please let me know what you have done if this particular patient has CNS disease. Anyone can take the question. Anybody can take the question.
Ma'am, I have no experience with CNS Mets and ribociclib together.
Okay, anybody else wants to take this? Anybody else has any experience? Jovita?
Some of the articles which I had read previously showed benefit with abemaciclib in CNS Mets. So in practice, I have not seen, I have not used abemaciclib. So my question is, I think only when I start using it, I would know.
Yeah, so there is some data generation has more penetration, but in patient with stable CNS mets in the phase 3 in the Mona Lisa 3, patient with ribociclib did have a penetration, but yes, abemaciclib results in a more confirmed intracranial response, 5.2. Because the next generation PPIs, as you know, for all of them has a more greater penetration. So the PFS and the OS from the targeted drugs have shaped the metastasis of breast cancer guidelines. And if you see there is substantial benefit, there is the magnitude of clinical benefit scale. It is something recently introduced, looks into the rational and structured and consistent approach to get a meaningful benefit of all the data is available. And the ribociclib, if you see the clinical benefit ratios in terms of 5, both in the premenopausal as well as in the postmenopausal, 3, 4, 5, it is there. Even we do see with palbociclib, metastatic setting. Abemaciclib will be lesser, but then alpelisib, yes, is the next line to be used, and everolimus is much lesser. So if you see the clinical benefit ratio, we have maximum metastatic setting. I think this brings us to the end of today's talk. If Dr. Balaji is not there, then if Dr. Suman can give the closing remarks before we sign off for today.
Hello.
Dr. Suman.
Ma'am. Yeah.
Please concluding remarks.
Okay. Yeah, I'll give the concluding. So regarding CDK4, yes, CDK4 has opened up really a new school of treatment for metastatic breast cancer. So among the CDK4 inhibitors, I think we are still in the learning curve of selecting the right patient for the right drug. I think, in my opinion, ribociclib fares high in form of ease of giving. Like most of the drugs that we use on a palliative setting are going to be dose reduced at some point. So regarding dose reduction, I think ribociclib fares high. It's very easy to dose reduce because it comes in 200 mg tablets. So just cut one tablet or two tablets. And that way it is more easy. In other things, right now I'm also doing abemaciclib. So in abemaciclib, I think the advantage is you can use it as a single agent. So patients who are very old, who already have osteoporosis, who have issues with using either letrozole or fulvestrant. So these patients can go for abemaciclib because it can be given as a single agent. And also other thing is the neutropenia rates are almost nil in abemaciclib. So those and also as ma'am told, CNS meds at presentation, I try to incline to abemaciclib. So other than these one or two rare indications, the tempting thing, as we know, is overall survival. Although the trial is not powered to see the overall survival, but still these results are promising. Where I prefer ribociclib is particularly in premenopausal patients. There is no other drug which can fare this high. And postmenopausal patients also on a as Jovita told, on a economical basis, and also for ease of compliance, I generally go with ribociclib. So this is where these drugs start. And the company as such is supporting for testing also, PIK3 testing. So once they progress on this CDK4, then the next line will be the drug that is alpelisib Pluvicto. So the testing is also done free, done testing for many patients, and some of the patients have started. So this extends the survival for these patients, and we know what to do next for these breast cancer patients, metastatic breast cancer patients, once they are hormone positive. And I think that's where we stand.
Yeah. Okay. Few.
Only one comment, ma'am. Sorry. My audio was.
Yes, please.
Hello.
Yeah, please proceed.
Sorry, in between my audio was not working. That is why I could not answer. No, there is a earlier for the question you asked, I will be more confident based on the data to advise the CDK4 inhibitors. That was the question. And regarding abemaciclib, we used for one patient in a compassionate basis. Even though the patient was sick, she could tolerate abemaciclib, but we gave her a little lesser dose actually than the prescribed one. So it is very reasonably good drug. We can use it actually. If the cost is okay, definitely we can use it. So this is we are definitely more comfortable in ribociclib because of our ease in the dose modification and also the cost benefit.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, madam. Thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Bhabesh and Dr. Vikas, one sentence from your side before we close today's session. Ma'am?
Anita, before we close the session, I had just one query.
Please, yes, please, yes, please.
Recently, I came across a case discussion where patient stable on adjuvant hormone therapy for almost 4 years, progressed in lung and bone, and she was started on CDK4/6 plus fulvestrant. But with the first follow-up itself, patient had both clinical as well as radiological progression. So, Anita ma'am, you and any of if the doctors who are attending, have anybody come across such a case where patient on the first follow-up itself has started progressing on change of CDK4/6 plus fulvestrant? Because I have suggested PI3K mutation analysis on that, but report is awaited. So we just wanted to know if somebody has come across similar cases.
Yes, I had progression in about 3 months.
Suman and Akila.
Yeah, Bhavesh, yeah, same thing happened, and the people know I did the PIK3 testing and came positive.
Because I was suspecting the similar what you are telling, that
Yeah.
probably these patients
Mostly.
are PIK3 positive and they do not respond to
They don't
CDK4/6 inhibitor.
Correct.
Akila ma'am, you wanted to share?
No, I just wanted to know whether you had repeated biopsy, Bhavesh.
Repeat biopsy on progression was ERPS strong positive HER2 negative, because it was almost fitting into the clinical scenario of 4 years of disease-free interval, but still we did a biopsy.
Geeta ma'am, I just want to add one comment. Actually, the data is getting so robust, and I think in the years to come, the CDK4/6 inhibitors are marching forward to be used even in the adjuvant setting. So there are a lot of trials now coming up with like the early, the Natalie, the Patricia, the Pallas, and so many other trials are just coming up with the use of Palbo, Ribo in the adjuvant setting in early breast cancer itself. So hoping to look, start using in a broader sense, not just in the metastatic setting, also in the curative setting.
Before we conclude, I would just like to know practically. See, if any patient presenting to us in a metastatic setting and with a huge locally advanced breast carcinoma, huge mass without ulcer and pain, how comfortable are we in doing MRM for this patient?
Ma'am, can I answer? Basically,
Yeah,
ma'am, such patient undergo surgery only when they are having function, or as Anita madam said, maggots are there, or patient is having bleeding which is not stopping with medicines or PLRT. So those are the only conditions where for the patient's comfort and the relatives' comfort we'll ask or advise them to undergo a surgery. Otherwise, and definitely the surgery is planned plus minus skin grafting, where we can, if we cannot close, then probably skin grafting is done so that the patient has a good outcome.
Madam, this is Dr. Ibrahim. Madam, this is Dr. Ibrahim. Since you have, Akila madam, you have asked the question, I'll just like to add on. So the most important reason why such patients present to us late is because they have the fear that they will lose their breast. So that is the main reason why they come at the time with metastasis. So even if the patient doesn't have any ulcer or any other discomfort like bleeding, they won't accept for a mastectomy, even though they have metastatic symptoms also. So that is their main concept. So unless they have life-threatening infections or an ulceration or a bleeding, we don't go for a surgery, whether it's a simple mastectomy with or without skin grafting or this thing. So most of the time, mastectomy in a metastatic setting is mainly for ulceration or function or for bleeding only.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much to all the speakers. We will now end the meeting. Thank you.